Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the premiere episode of Rewatch Wednesdays. I finally said I was going to do this, and I have a fantastic guest he can introduce himself in a minute. And so what we're going to do is we're going to be analyzing, critiquing, and dissecting this movie. Of course, the first one I made mention of was Steve Jobs. And so just before we get started, guys, just take a minute, hit the follow button, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I want to get everybody, on this because this is not only we have this, we've got the House of the Dragon main podcast, we got Rewatch Wednesdays, this episode, we've got the weekly roundup, and we got Mob Mondays. I got a ton of content for you. Anyways, moving on, I said I have a special guest with us. Special guest, let's introduce yourself, and how can people find you on social media?
Hey everybody, it is me, Galliot. I'm going to go by, my real name is Henry Galliot, but I just go by Galliot just for personal reasons, stuff like that. I am on Twitter as the non-Kino Cinephile, and I also write for Geeks Worldwide. In fact, I actually have a second website I'm publishing articles for that I'm going to be announcing very soon. I'm working for pieces on that. So I'm a busy guy, and also I'm a film producer and stuff like that. So I have a lot of horses in this race. I'm pretty excited, but I'm so happy to be on Mr. David Steele's podcast. We've been friends for Twitter for the last month or so. We actually met on the Batgirl situation. I think that's when we first talked about this whole thing, and also the Ezra Miller stuff. And
by the way, so if you actually want to go back and listen to this last roundup, there was a huge story by the CFO. Speaking of Batgirl, and we'll get to Steve Jobs in a minute. But there was a huge story by the CFO of Warner Brothers Discovery. I don't know if you saw it in the Hollywood
Report. I did, actually, yeah.
And so basically, without going into too much of detail, he basically said that the marketing was overblown. And it just, and I'm not going to go too deep into it, but there was a couple of main things I saw. Number one, he said he wanted somebody to lead the franchise. Well, if you can't get Dwayne Johnson to do it, I don't know. I mean, I hope you're not going to bank on Ezra Miller in The Flash. Yeah. Number two, the quote he used was, well, this is almost like going on a Boeing 747 on one engine. Last time I checked, most planes crash, guys.
Yeah, definitely.
And number three, they were just putting the almighty buck. They had a $985 million write-off, including Batgirl.
That's pretty crazy.
So I just...
Yeah.
So that's my thoughts.
If I may also.
Absolutely.
There's also been a lot of other stuff about the VFX work in Hollywood now, especially with superhero films, Marvel being one of the bigger ones. So it's been a pretty big year for superhero behind the scenes drama stuff. So it's been kind of crazy. It's just been I can't think of one studio this year that hasn't had some type of drama there, but the main two has been Disney and Warner Brothers. And again, I love those two studios, but man, I think probably the worst studio that's had it worse this week is probably Warner Brothers. But anyway, we don't want to get into that.
Well, and actually, the last thing I'm going to plug is this: coming up this week on the roundup, we're just doing D23 stories.
Absolutely,
that's it. We're gonna drop a lot of content.
Yeah,
so be ready for that. Anyways, that's not what you're here for. You're here for Steve Jobs. And
yep, absolutely.
Here we go. So,
a universal picture.
Yes, an absolutely universal picture. So I'm going to read off a couple of main facts about this picture and just get your thoughts. So as you made mention, this was done by Universal and Legendary Entertainment. Mm-hmm. So this was released right around the end of October of 2015. So we're going almost 7 years.
Yeah, and if
that's unbelievable.
Wasn't directed by Danny Boyle, correct?
Yes, it was.
All right. Okay.
Just unbelievable. So the movies right around that time were movies such as Burnt, which actually starred Bradley Cooper and Sienna Miller, which I saw and I wrote a whole piece on. And basically the title of the article I put was, it was overhyped and undercooked.
Yeah. I see. That was also produced by Mr. Gordon Ramsay, correct?
Yes.
Wow.
Bridge of Spies, which actually, that was starring Tom Hanks and Mark Rylance, and I still remember watching the Oscars, and because Sylvester Stallone, we've had this conversation off air. It's, everybody said Sly was going to win it. He was 73 years old. He won the Globe. He was just cruising. And then on top of all that, You had, and don't forget, Tom Hardy was nominated for the Reverend too, so that was a secondary thing. And then when they said the Oscar goes to Mark Rylance for Bridge of Spies, my mouth hit the ground. I'm like, what? Huh? And so I went back and I actually watched it again. Because you know how you watch a film and you say, I didn't like it. I gave it a little time to breathe and I sat down and I just went, this is horrible. And you haven't heard from him. I mean, he did that little thing on Peacock called the, it was a little series on there. And it was just, okay, moving on. But the other film that was out there right around that time.
Our thing. It's a Universal movie, so Peacock.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
There.
And so
paid by them, by the way.
No. And Rue. And of course, Brie Larson, who just rose like a shooting star, literally and figuratively.
Absolutely.
Won for Best Actress.
For that.
Yeah. And she's in Captain Marvel. She was in Captain Marvel, which was a $1 billion film. Anyways, this was on only a $30 million budget.
$30 million.
And it only opened to a little over $500,000.
Ugh.
That's unbelievable. So, it went on to gross $35 million worldwide. So, I mean, in relation to it, it made its money back, but it was still a loss for the studio. I mean, but it wasn't a huge loss.
Yeah.
As you made mention, written by Aaron Sorkin, well, Danny Boyle directed, but written by Aaron Sorkin. And anybody who knows anything about film, A Few Good Men, The West Wing,
yes, oh my God,
Molly's Game, Moneyball, I can go on and on and on.
Yeah.
The Social Network, unbelievable writer.
If I just may, I'm such a big Aaron Sorkin fan. I love The West Wing. And actually, I even loved his later HBO series, Newsroom, starring Jeff Daniels, which, by the way, is actually in this movie, actually. It's really
Scully. He was just unbelievable as Scully. We'll get to him in a minute.
Yeah.
It was based off the book by Walter Isaac. And as you may mention, it was directed by Danny Boyle. 127 Hours, Slumdog Millionaire, Trainspotting. So he was known, but he wasn't really a household name, shall we say. So this movie stars Michael Fassbender, who was actually nominated for Best Actor. Kate Winslet, nominated for Best Actress. Seth Rogen, who I thought was underrated in this movie, did a hell of a job. Jeff Daniels, as you just made mention, it's John Scully. And a couple, Michael Starberg as Andy Hertzfeld, and Kathleen Watterson as Christiane Brennan. So let's just start. What were your overall impressions of the movie?
I actually really like this film. Again, keep in mind here, one of the things about this movie that I find kind of fascinating was that it was released a year after this other Steve Jobs biopic, which was starred Ashton Kutcher. And that movie kind of like fell into the victimization of saying, oh, just because like an actor kind of looks like somewhere in a photo means he's going to be the best person for the part. And, that one is there. But with this one, I feel like this was actually a much more interesting look at Steve Jobs' life, because again, it's not like a retelling of his life through like the traditional sense. It's through like all these like events of Apple launching thing, and it's kind of like a slice of life thing, which is kind of like peak Aaron Sorkin, because again, you can kind of learn a lot from somebody based on like a segment or moment in their life when they're interacting with people and stuff like that. Because you get like a generalized story of the life thing, it kind of feels sometimes a little hollow, but for this one, it feels like every single one of these events, you get like a good sense of who these people were at that moment in time. And I feel like Michael Fassbender, who has had a very rocky career post X-Men and even in the X-Men series, did a great job with this. I'm kind of shocked he didn't win any awards for it, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm not sure if he did or didn't. Again, I was like 50 years old when I watched this. So
yeah. So I saw this when it first came out in limited release, but I gotta say, the first, and you summed it up so eloquently there. So this takes place, this isn't your average biopic.
Yeah.
Okay. This is about 3 product launches. One in 1984, one, I believe, in the early 90s, and then the iMac. And so what this does, what Danny Boyle did was so amazing. I mean, the script was just so tight. But the first shot you see, or the first few minutes you see is it's not him as a child or
him as an adult. It's him as a
no, not even that. You're looking from the 1930s or the 1940s, and you're seeing these big, monstrous computers and what a computer could be and how they were actually storing data back in the day. And so then we fast forward. And so we fast forward to the first product launch in 1984. And Michael Fassbender, of course, who was nominated for Best Picture or Best Actor for this. And I believe, and we'll get into this in a little bit, that him not winning this totally derailed his career. I'll tell you why in a few minutes. But one of the great things you saw was, look, the costumes. Let's talk about the costumes for a minute, because what Danny Boyle did is they adjusted the costumes so accordingly. So they had what they were maybe wearing in 1984. Okay?
Yeah, and also the wig as well.
Yeah, and so, the first few shots you see is he's on stage, and, so you see the shot in the trailer, he says, well, it has to say hello. And so then, we go upstairs, and so Joanna, played by Kate Winslet, is saying basically you have to manage expectations. And so Chris Ann, who we meet, okay, she has a daughter. They had a daughter together. And so basically she's on welfare. And basically she's wanting to get some funds from Steve Jobs.
And actually, if I may, throughout all of those scenes is like you can see like the desperate look in her eyes and stuff like that. And I think she gets that across very well. Specifically, even like that one scene about like her talking about her dental work, you could kind of feel the desperation and all of the like the true like worrisome thing of her situation, and like the fact that like this guy is very much who is a rich privileged person is kind of just doing the bare minimum. It says a lot about his character. And I think Michael Fassbender plays it so subtly in those scenes, and it kind of shows you how very disconnected he feels from reality and his work, and stuff like that.
Well, and that leads right into what he has is it was labeled a distortion zone.
Yeah. So
when they're talking about the paternity of Lisa, okay, he basically, she basically said, well, you said that, 95% of other men could have slept with me to have this child. And he said, no, I was just using an algorithm. And that immediately shows you the characterization of this man. And he's not thinking like an average person.
Yeah.
It's just, this is his quote distortion zone.
Yeah.
So the first real conflict you see is when, basically they're right in front, and, Andy says hi to Chris Ann, and he says, I'm going to embarrass you in front of everybody. I'm good. And by the way, I love the camera work here. What they did was they started from the side, and Danny suddenly, slowly moved it around.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, I'm going to embarrass you in front of your friends, your colleagues, the press, the media, and everybody else. And I'm going to say, this was made by so-and-so, and this was made by so-and-so. And if you don't do something to help you get more bullets out of the gun, this is what I'm going to do. And you saw how immediately vindictive he was. And so, of course, Andy, and so as everybody's going in the elevator, he says, stop. What size shirt are you? And he says, medium. He's like, what size shirt am I? And he has an epiphany. The disc can fit in your pocket. And he's like, okay. He's the only one to see this. Nobody else picked up on this. And it says, okay, so he's able to, in real time, get an idea. And so he says, so he tells Joanna, go outside, try and find somebody with the same size shirt as you, as me, and I will trade them for a free computer. And so what we see is basically he's doing this in real time, and meanwhile he has Chris Ann to deal with, And he basically just blows her off and says, okay, here's a check for, $25,000. Go take care of what you got to do. And even that one scene, so Chris Ann and Steve are so close that basically he says, well, will you forgive me? And she's like, well, it's borderline unethical what they want to do. And, so I just thought, so the way they filmed this, and this is fascinating, is what they did was they wrote the script, they practiced, they rehearsed for 2 weeks. Because as you know, most of the shots, I'd say about 85% of the shots are moving.
Yeah.
They're moving through halls, they're moving through doorways, they're moving through rooms.
If I may, it was kind of, yes. I think it's kind of like a very odd thing to compare with, but it kind of stood out to me. It kind of felt a little bit like Birdman, though it wasn't like a fully moving shot like that series. I mean, that was kind of funny because like a year later and stuff like that. And I feel like the motion, and you can feel like the stress of every single one of those events. Because again, if you ever been behind like one of those like big like corporate events, it's always stressful. Everybody's like trying to lose their heads. Everybody's like, oh my God, if I fuck this up, I'm going to get fired. I've been in one of those things before, actually. It was like, man,
it's nerve-wracking, isn't it?
It's super nerve-wracking. The press is there. Everybody's there. And the fact that, like, Danny Boyle was able to, like, put you in the shoes of those, like, very high-profile figures. And I know this may be a little bit off topic here as well, but also another person that really surprised me in this film was actually Seth Rogen as well, who was playing Steve Wozniak. Steve Wozniak.
Yes.
He just, like, keeps popping and randomly saying, look at my product is the one that's keeping us afloat, not your like stupid passion projects. And he keeps that, and though I kind of wish we could have explored that a little bit more. The stuff he has in the scenes that he's in makes the whole thing feel a lot more tangible and a lot more like, okay, I wish we get more of this. I still see how I'm still getting just enough to kind of see the friction between Steve and Wozniak,
Yeah. Well, not only that, he's having to juggle everything. He's having to juggle John.
Mm-hmm.
He's having. Even before he goes out on the stage, you have that. So they talk about John Scully, played by Jeff Bridges. He's in Michael Fassbender, Steve Jobs. They talk about control.
Oh, totally.
And he's like, why do you feel like you're out of control? Because so he was going to read a quote when he arrived on Steve Jobs was going to read a quote. And so one of them says, I bet $50 that, he wouldn't read this. But it's the simple premise of we find out later why he feels this way. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. But it's like just everything about it. So, so they rehearsed for 2 weeks and then they shot the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Every scene, and some of these are very long takes, and once again, we get the emotion, we get the everything else, and whether it's the Time magazine cover or whatever else it is, and so then after they shot a sequence, so they shot Act 1, they came back, they rehearsed for 2 more weeks, shot Act 2. Rehearsed for 2 more weeks, and then shot Act 3.
Yeah, you could feel like every scene is planned out. Every line of dialogue feels very like well thought out, all put together. It doesn't feel kind of sloppily put together like the previous Jobs film that came out a year later. This felt really, like it felt like a nice, well-oiled machine, if you know what I mean. It felt like it felt like it was like an iPhone.
It was tight. It was tight. I think that's the word you're looking for. The camera shots were tight. The dialogue was tight. The acting was good. I never saw Jobs. So I feel like, that to make comparisons too is kind of hard. But so Act 1 was all about 1984. And I actually, being as old as I am, I'm going to date myself here.
Oh, come on.
Here's the thing. I remember the Macintosh. I remember in 1984, my family having a Macintosh. And that was the huge, huge thing back then. Absolutely. And so Apple, of course, is what they are today. And it was funny because when I was writing my notes for this, originally for the piece that I wrote, I was on my iPhone. And I'm thinking to myself,
how ironic,
oh my
right?
God, I'm taking my notes on exactly how ironic am I taking all these notes on an iPhone, which many years later he actually developed. But
Pretty crazy.
so I loved everything. So we move from 1984. And by the way, let's talk about the transitions for a minute. What did you think of the transitions from one act to the other act? Because they were clear, right?
Yeah, they felt very clear. They were very crisp cut. They felt like they kind of like moved to the wing. They didn't waste any time. It felt like, okay, we're done with this scene. Let's go to the next scene. At first, it's a little bit jarring, but once you get into the groove of it, it starts to make the story a lot more tangible. And though it may be a little jerky at first, it gets the job done well, and then it grows on you as the film goes on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it was just the fact that they used historical events, the fact that they used events that actually happened in Apple, the fact that they used, you saw Lisa growing up, was great. And by the way, I mean, so even to this day, that commercial that was played on the Super Bowl is still the highest rated commercial.
Was that the one of like the person with the axe just throwing it at the screen?
Yes,
oh yeah,
yes.
Okay.
1984.
1980. Oh my God.
Because it's based, of course, on the George Orwell.
1984. Yeah.
Correct.
I should have known that. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And so and that's what Scully and Jobs are talking about right before he goes on stage. And I mean, they were kidding because they said, well, they were talking about the financing of the commercials and so how the spots were done and everything else. But yeah, so we go from 1984 to the early 90s, which is 1992.
Yep.
So everything fast forwards. We have Lisa growing up. We have Apple starting to make its mark. We have, a lot of different events. We have historical events and everything else. And then, so the next thing we see is Steve Jobs again, and basically Michael Fassbender is in a different garb. He's in a different costume. I really thought that they could have won an Academy Award for costume design.
Absolutely. Again, as I said before, the wigs are kind of perfect, especially the last one at the end. I don't want to spoil it. He looks pitch perfect like Steve Jobs.
Yes, he does. That was the first thing I thought of when I saw it.
Yeah.
So, we're at the next premiere. And so one of the Andys, as they were called, basically comes down and he says, hey, Steve, what's going on? And so he says he's left Apple at this point. So he's no longer with Apple. He's developed his own company called Next.
Yep.
And so the major sequence you see is Jobs and Hertzfeld actually in the orchestra.
Yeah.
But let me go back for a minute because there's a scene that's really good. I mean, they're all very good, but the scene in the house with Jobs that has all these papers around him, trying to figure this puzzle in his mind out, and then you have John Scully come in and basically say, "Look, we're going to kill the project," And so he's like, and this is the first time that this happened, and it's like, why? This is not right. So then that's why there was a big disconnect there, and then he left. Okay, so we fast forward to 92. So this is where Hertzfeld and Jobs are actually in the orchestra pit. And he says, why, basically he says, well, what is this? And he's asking Hertzfeld this. And so he's like, oh, this is, really good technology. And so he's going through, actually, to show Steve Jobs what it is. And he says, excuse me, this just shows you the humor of Steve Jobs, okay? And how much, excuse me, stewardess?
How much
this man is
disconnected from like the world, and he's just
exactly
on his work. Yeah.
Excuse me, stewardess. This man would be apparently trying to set off a bomb, and he's like, "You think this is a bomb?" He's like, Right now, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, because that's a nice subtlety. Because again, he sees any threat to like his business as like a personal attack, and that
Exactly, the distortion field.
Yeah, and then the fact that he kind of is like merged like all of his identity into his company kind of shows you how like the downfall of like sort of like capitalistic ideas and sort of like how we, you know, I don't know.
No, absolutely.
I was going to go like in a weird
You're right.
social.
And so this is why, you know, what he says, do you know why? He's like, what do you do? And this is the clip that's, you know, everywhere. What do you do? Why is it that 7 times a day? First of all, why isn't Lisa hasn't heard of me? Well, how many fourth graders have heard of you? Okay, but what is it? Why do you? What is it that you do? I'm the only person that knows this is a fictional character. Okay, you build this. You know, colleges come to you and say they need a powerful workstation. You supply them with a $6,000 machine. Okay, that they're going to have to get the optional hard drive, which, by the way, is another $4,000.
Yep.
Not to mention a printer that's $2,500. So this workstation is $12,500, and you're the only person that basically cares that it's housed in a perfect cube. You know why I came? He's like, I don't. You think you just? He's like, because you're going to get killed. You're going to get killed, and I'm here to stand by you because that's what men do. That's what friends do.
Yeah.
And so he's walking away, and he says, Tell me something else I don't know. I mean, it's like he, you know, I'm sure you've seen the movie Training Day?
Training Day, I've seen parts of it.
Okay, Denzel Washington.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a scene in Training Day. I use the line all the time.
Yeah.
And basically, Lorenzo says, I'm playing him. It's chess, not checkers. Okay? The point is, Jobs is 2 steps ahead. So he already knows this is going to fail when he says this to Hertzfeld. So at this point, he doesn't take it personally at this point. Okay? So once again, you know, he says, and that's when the scene happens that basically, you know, I'm going to watch you do it center court. You know, I don't care. Don't come out and have other people, because John Scully shows up, okay, played by Jeff Bridges, and he basically says, at this point, you know, he was trying to be nice. He's like, look, I'm going to watch you do it center court. Don't come out and have anybody else slap me around the press. Waz, you know, anybody else, you, whatever. Don't have him do it. Okay, don't have Rayman do it. Okay, whatever you believe, I'm going to always protect him. That's what real men do. And he really rubs the salt to the wound, and he says, look, I'm going to sit down and have a nice 55, you know, a nice steak dinner with a 55 Margaux, and he's like, look, I don't care. I'm going to watch you do it center court, and I'm going to watch you fail. And that just shows you the vindictiveness of it. And so, of him. And so as he's leaving, so Joanna basically says, you know, he slides down the handrail of the stairs, and he says, Joanna says to Steve, look, there's been an award for the last 5 years of people that stand up to me. He's like, I've won it for the last 3 years. And he's like, you know, because they're a confidant. And he's like, look, and then I love the scene. I know I'm rambling on here. Forgive me, but this is just, I gush about this movie. But here's the thing. That scene where they're in the hallway and they're talking about the Space Center. You know which one I'm referring to.
I see it,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. And Skylab. And he basically says, they knew how they were going to get it up. They didn't know how they were going to get it down.
Yeah.
And basically says, you're going to have to, you know, she was called a work wife and whatnot, but he's like, look, I know exactly what I'm doing. And the simple fact is that,
it goes back to the arrogance of like the character of Steve Jobs and how Michael Fassbender is so perfect at like capturing that. Because again, Philip Ashton Kutcher, who was kind of trying to mimic Steve Jobs without actually like really, you know, understanding it entirely. But with Steve Jobs, he's kind of though he's more into it, because again, it's not about looking like the character. That's not irrelevant. It's about like sort of like sort of like embodying what that character believes. And if we hear the embodiment of that character,
yeah, no, absolutely,
yeah.
And so basically, what ends up happening is that they have a meeting, and basically she says, "Look, I've stood up to you for the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm your worker wife." And he's like, "Look, here's the thing. I know this is going to fail, but Apple is going to have to buy me back for $1 billion because I'm going to give them the iOS they need and everything else. Because at this point, all that Apple's developed is the new."
Yeah. And like his hubris and the type of stuff there. And again,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we move from the 92 and 93. And once again, a great transition.
Yeah, this is the one that's the better one.
1998.
Yeah.
And by the way, so we've had, I'm not making, so we have Chris Ann come back.
Yep.
And basically, Lisa is now
an adult.
14, almost an adult. She's in her early teens, about 13 or 14.
Yeah.
And so, Christiane, this is the dentist scene you were referring to. And basically says, that, I need this money, this, and this. Mm-hmm. So he basically says, look, if I ever hear that you do anything to harm Lisa, I'm going to have you killed. I know people. And basically she says, are you threatening me? You see the disconnect because Steve thought she was a horrible parent. Mm-hmm. And so he cuts her a check for like another check. Yeah. And then the big thing was the house. So we fast forward to 1998.
Yeah, and also I want to make
go for it
there. So earlier in the scene where you start talking to her when a younger stage, you should be in school. Kind of tells you a lot about how he says all these things, but he doesn't really mean them. You know what I mean?
Right. And by the way, I should say, you bring up a great point. In the first act, we see that Lisa is playing on the Mac.
Yeah.
And this has definite relevance later on in the film. Totally. And so what ends up happening is Christiane's like, what are you doing? She's like, or what is that? She asks Lisa, what is that? It's like an abstract. And so basically that was fascinating to see. And so we see Lisa later on, but Lisa was played by 3 different actresses.
Yeah.
One that was about 5, one that was about 12, and one that was 19 or so. So now we're going to the final watch.
Yeah.
And once again, the transitions were fabulous. Historical events, Apple, news clips, everything else.
Yeah.
Tell us about that first shot. When you saw that first shot of the third act, and you knew it was a clear transition, what did you think?
I thought it was a lot better. We're talking about the transition?
Yes. Yeah, well, not only the transition, but the first shot of the third act.
I thought it was...
When we see Steve Jobs at the first time in 1998.
I think it's actually pretty well done because, again, it kind of shows us like this is kind of like the ultimate final form of Jobs we'll be taking there. And we see the culmination of the last 2 events there where he is more like in his prime now. Whereas before he was more, he was arrogant, but he was still trying to find his way. And I think the middle section was when he has this very cocky thing. It's like, you're going to have to buy me back. But this is him at his nearly full power there and him in his zone finally.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the shot that, so going back to the whole Scully-Jobs confrontation in the second act, basically, when they're talking about it, Scully says to Jobs, you knew what they were going to do. And so that was a great flashback scene. So, and when it's raining out and they're in the room and he says, what's your resume? And he's like, basically Scully had said that the Mac was overpriced and everything. It's like, I'm the leading expert on the Mac. Mm-hmm. Okay, John, what's your resume? And so he goes off and says, you're insubordinate, you make people miserable. Our programmers are fleeing to Dell, HP. Wall Street doesn't know who's riding the right, Microsoft. Wall Street doesn't know who's driving the bus here. And I'm the CEO of Apple, Steve. He's like, and he slams his hands on the table. He's like, but what did you do before that? You sold carbonated sugar water. He says, I sat in a fucking garage and invented the future where hacks lead and people show for a thing of hands. And so John's like, all right, I'm done. All right, you can either I will either resign tonight. You can either have me, okay, or you got to get rid of him. Or I'll resign tonight. I don't care. I'm going to call for a vote.
Yep.
And Steve just looks at the secretary. He's like, I fucking dare you. And then that shot where it's the silhouette, and we've seen it 1,000 times in 1,000 different films, but it's still potent.
Yeah.
And you just see everybody raise their hands.
Yeah. And if I may.
Go for it, yeah.
This thing I always find kind of funny there. It's like people complain about we see them as a five. It's like that's true, but it's also like how it's executed. Because again, that's all about that's what film really is. It's all about execution. It's not about like seeing something new. It's about how it's executed within the story. To me,
interpretation.
Yeah,
interpretation. And you just see everybody raise their hands. Yeah. And so going back to that scene, he's like, you know what? I hadn't really thought about it for a while, but I can see why you're upset.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he says, I don't bleed, and I bled that night.
Yeah.
He says, you know, I'm basically, I understand why you're upset and everything else. I said, and John basically says, none of the publishers, you've manipulated everybody. And he's like, well, you know, I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And so that's when Joanna comes in and the whole sequence we talked about. But it was just like, that just shows you, once again, going back to what you're saying about the hubris and arrogance of Jobs. So we fast forward to the third act. That first shot, when I saw that first shot, I haven't seen pictures. I swear to God that was Steve Jobs. The haircut, the glasses, the turtleneck sweater, I honestly thought that was a reincarnation of Steve Jobs.
Yeah, it was really well.
It was unbelievable. And so we fast forward to 1998. And so once again, we're back at the whole thing of, you know, managing expectations. And so we're in the final act. And so now it's Lisa to come by.
Yeah. It's just her, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And basically, Andy said, you know, so Steve calls Andy into his office and basically says that, you know, so I understand, you know, you're paying for a tuition. And he's like, yeah, I wrote Harvard a check for $25,000. And so he basically starts to degrade him. He's like, what? He's like, well, somebody had to be there for it. And he says, what? Because even Joanne says in the third act, you got to see that she looks like you. I mean, the realization is they're pounding this into him.
Yeah,
you have to see.
He's kind of like missed out on her life there and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and he realizes that. And so, getting back to that scene, he basically says, you know, I've been talking with Chrisanne, and Chrisanne and I are friends. And so, we have a relationship outside of work. And so he says, you know, basically that, as I said, somebody has to do it. And so at that point, he's like, he then realizes, right? He then understands it. Okay. He's like, all right, I'll cut you a check when I'm done.
Yeah.
I'll cut you a check by the end of the day.
And that he cares more about his work than like the actual people.
Right.
And I would.
And that, yeah, go ahead.
Then it kind of comes in. It will come culmination during that parking lot scene.
Yes.
Yeah. At the end there.
At the very, very end.
Yeah.
And so that was, I mean, just a brilliant shot.
Really well put together.
When he's alone in the office, and so you see the shot with the crane and the lights overhead, and it's just like, oh my God. And he starts mumbling to himself about microchips. Uh-huh. You know, this is a higher gigahertz than this and everything else, and you start to understand the man. And so I went, oh.
And I would say with like every passing event, it becomes more sterile as well. That's kind of a nice little subtle thing I kind of noticed in there as well. You know, it becomes more sleek, more calculated and stuff like that. And like as he goes on, he becomes more throughout the look. It was like a little more ragged during the beginning, and then as it goes along, it's more refined. He's more stuff like that. You know.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
And by the end, he becomes the most human when he's at his most, sterile. When he's like very much in the sweater, the glasses, the short hair. It's very pristine. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So at that point, he wants to talk to Lisa.
Yeah.
And so basically says he has Joanna say, because they're on stage, and says, so this is the big climatic scene. This is the scene that I think of all the scenes, of all the shots, of all the way they did this 5 minutes was the movie. We have Seth Rogen, who played there, and then you have Jobs on stage. And mind you, there's somebody from the press there on stage with him, who's been following him from time. Because we should say this. So in the beginning, that Time magazine named something the Man of the Year. And so there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of copies that were going to be distributed on all the chairs. And Jobs saw this, and it's like, get this the hell out of here. I don't want this. Because he wasn't looking. And so you see him, to your point, he's paying more attention. And so basically he says to Joanne, go get Lisa, please. And she says, look, she doesn't want to come back. She's embarrassed. She's like, please, just go get her. So this is the showdown we have.
Yeah.
And it's Hertzfeld and Jobs. And so basically at that point, he's like, Steve, like, yeah. He's like, I got a favor to ask. And you already know where he's going because he's done it before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I need to ask a favor. He's like, yeah, sure. And he's like, I need you to acknowledge the Apple II team. He's like, no. He's like, just acknowledge the top guys. He's like, no. He's like, come on. This is this was a major part of this company and personal computing. He's like, no, this isn't a luncheon.
Because he cares about like his image than like helping others. And that's
exactly.
And that's brought through in that one scene there. And again, the hardest thing of like any biopic of any kind is sort of like nailing the ending of it. Because again, just look at like any music video biopic. It's like the ending always feels kind of somewhat confused by its messaging. Because again, they try to cram so much in like a 2-hour runtime. And this is why I think kind of Elvis kind of works probably better than most of them that kind of came out a couple months back, is that it felt like the ending of like how Elvis very much was like worked dry by his like owner, by his producer played by Tom Hanks, kind of comes through actually in that ending scene there. And I think it's done very well. And I think I think Baz Luhrmann does a great job there. But again, going back to Steve Jobs, I think this is probably a masterclass in to do that. You know what I mean? Like how the third act very much is like a great culmination piece of what has happened before in the last two events and 2 acts. Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is he's like, no, this isn't a luncheon. This is a product launch. And he's like, if you're going to lay these people off, okay, you just want to acknowledge. He's like, look, they're going to live. And this just shows you how he thought. He's like, look, they're going to live in the biggest houses in the unemployment line. Okay? He's like, and he says, these people live and die by your praise. Point. So then we get Joanne walk in and it's like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
And so Andy's like, nothing.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Where everything kind of falls apart,
Well, exactly. And so, he starts walking away and so basically at that point, Jobs says, you were 90 days from insolvent. I had to have 3 accountants streamline, tell me what was going on and streamline it for me. Start with one of the accountants then, and so basically he says, it's not, so we get a flashback scene where they're in the garage and so they're having a back and forth and he's like, it's not binary. So he basically says every time you say it's binary, I'm going to say, fuck you. Mm-hmm. So at that point, and he basically says, it's not binary. And he's like, fuck you. And he's like, your products are better than you. He's like, that's the point, brother. Mm-hmm. So you see the rift in the abyss.
Yeah.
That is what that was. And basically, Andy ends it by saying, you know what? When before, people used to ask me about Steve Jobs. I used to tell them, you know what? I like the solid workbench. And Steve was a big picture guy. Now, when people ask me about Steve Jobs, he says, I'm just going to say Steve Jobs is an asshole. He's like, that's, your products are better than you. He's like, that's the idea, brother. And he walks away. And basically, you see them at the end, basically at a rift. And it's no happy ending, right? And so, it closes by what we were talking about earlier in the thing about how Lisa comes back and she's upset and they finally make amends.
Absolutely.
And so at this point, he still has the drawing that she did and basically said, you know what Lisa stands for?
Yep.
And she recited, she's like, no, I named it after you. And this is where you see the drawing.
Yeah.
And so basically why don't you tell our viewers here about the rooftop scene?
Yeah. I didn't get the last part there. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. Tell us about the rooftop scene.
The rooftop scene is so like, again, I think they're about to leave. She's about to leave her car up there, and like Steve is up there in the apartment. He's feeling more pristine again. He's about to do this washing thing. There's this very human moment where he's like, he feels like an actual person. He feels like he's actually like, caring about this person for the first time than just, blanking a check there. And I feel like it's very tender. And even though the parking lot scene is a little sterile, I think the light of the sun in there kind of shows, that there is some form of hope there. And again, I know I'm probably reaching, like Mr. Fantastic there, but it's really well put together. I think it is a really thoughtful and very insightful way that even though Steve Jobs is a very calculating, kind of cold person, this one moment kind of shares that for all the issues he's had with his family, he still cared about his daughter.
Yeah, and so at that point, then she's like, come in and just watch the presentation. And she's like, you sure? I'm like, yeah. And then you see them having the talk, and so this is when the control factor comes in. What we touched upon in the first act. And basically that, he's like, well, you wanted to know why I didn't like control? Or, I thought, because I was adopted. And my mother, they gave me back. And so, I didn't know any of this, and maybe this was contrived. I don't think so. And he says, well, what would be so wrong that a 3-month-old could do something? Like, you don't have any control. So one of the stipulations was that they had to be college educated, Catholic, and wealthy.
Yeah.
And so this is how he came to know the Jobs family. And so at that point, it's like, have you met your father? Like, yeah, you've seen him too, because he would go to that restaurant, and so it's like, and then we get to that cut to the flashback scene, and like, oh my God, that's your father?
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't you tell him? My sister found him
because
like,
she wanted
probably
to be known for herself than just
exactly, and she probably find some way to sue me.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Steve, I'm sorry. And so at that point, you feel the loneliness of him.
Yeah.
At that point, because all he has is his sister. And so at that point, he's like, okay, it's time. And so, it's time to make amends. And so they shake hands. And so as he's like, I don't have to tell you, the Wall Street's going to see what happens in the first, 6 months. I don't have to train you type of thing. You'll figure it out. And so as he's walking out, I loved it. He says, that's why I killed the Newton.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, why? He's like, because the stylus. Mm-hmm. If you're holding a stylus, you can't use the other hand.
Absolutely.
The things that we could have done together. And I love the shot. You just see the door
really
close,
well put together.
His face. The things we could have done. Jesus, how much torment and turmoil the man goes through. He's able to actually think of something so pertinent like that. But nobody would, he didn't say anything because he figures and nobody would understand. And it was unbelievable.
It was really
so
good. Yeah.
So we're not even talking. I mean, we've been gushing on this for the better part of 40 minutes.
Actually, we're
not even.
Yeah.
We're not even talking about Aaron Sorkin.
Yeah, Aaron. So I feel like we kind of have, though, because again, the writing of the piece very much is sort of like a kind of like a great like slice of life thing. Because again, think about Aaron Sorkin is that he's able to get the slice of life moments perfectly. Just look at West Wing and even the Newsroom. Again, like most of those episodes are like about day-to-day stuff there. And it's really well thought out and it's really well put together and it has this like nice, feeling of, okay, this is what these guys were doing in that situation there. And that's how, and it crafts it perfect because these figures, it kind of paints a real picture of who these people were when they were sort of operating at their fullest,
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. And I have no doubt that still one of the greatest scenes in that show, The Newsroom, is when Jeff Bridges is talking about America.
You mean Jeff Daniels? Yeah.
Jeff Daniels. I'm sorry. Why did I say Jeff Bridges? Thank you.
Thank you
for the correction. But the point is
Jeff Daniels.
Yeah. That's still Jeff Daniels. I'm sorry. Why did I say that? That's 6 minutes. Thank you. Thank you for the correction. The point is that, that's still one of the greatest
things. There by the end of that,
that 6 minutes
first season.
And
he's also that payoff question, is working for them and also the person actually by the end of that, by the end of the first season, but it can be like the person asked that question, is working for them and also the person actually that is sort of the sign during that thinks that it's not, but it can be. I got to put this in a better version there, but together because it kind of shows how he was pushed by that is sort of the journey of the first season. He was able to become. I got to put this in a better version there, but I'm saying like sort of like how he was pushed by that and through the journey of the first season. He was able to become in this film and more. He was able to get more politically involved. And I think that's sort of similar like journey that Steve goes on in this film as well. Through that.
The thing is that like the one thing I'm just thinking about it right now.
Was that good analysis?
No, it was fantastic. The thing is that like biopics. The one thing I notice about Aaron Sorkin, I mean, you take a look at it's not all of like this. I mean, regardless what you think, but you look at the number of you take a look at Social Network. I mean, regardless what you think of, you look at Molly's Game, Facebook. And I say Molly's Game because Molly's Game was actually based on Molly's Game. And I say Molly's Game because Molly's Game was actually based on a true story.
He is very good
about a steer that
putting stuff
had an accident.
He's very good. He is very good at putting stuff like there. He's very good at like kind of like trying to like paint like a character somewhat fair, but not. Like he gets in many ways. I think Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs. He gets in many ways. I think Mark distinguished them from each other in a very interesting way.
Absolutely.
And he's able to distinguish them from each other in a very millennial style thing. Wow, like Steve Jobs is more the boomer, young millennial style generation. Wow, like Steve Jobs is more the boomer, like kind of older generation where he's stuck in his ways. But as Mark Zuckerberg kind of more stilted, as open and free as he was, he became more stilted and sort of robotic. But as Steve Jobs went on, as his life got on, he started out as robotic. Again, both very flawed human beings. As his life got on,
not only that,
again, both very flawed human beings.
The two I just named. Not only that, and then you take a look at like Steve Jobs. The two I just named. Then he takes on. And then you have trial like a Steve Jobs, which was based on. Then he takes on the trial of Chicago 7,
but it's fantastic.
I
actually love that movie.
And so
middle, but it's fantastic.
Events. Yeah. So, and it just, he does well. And people so events. Well. And it's just so well. And this just shows you how good he is. And this just shows you how good he is. I just love as a writer. He's one of, and I know there's a couple else. I just love out there. I mean, he's one of the. He's one of the I know there's a couple else.
Absolutely, I agree with that. I think he's probably number
one. For my money, he's one of the top 5.
Yeah, absolutely. I know he's had some probably number one. Like. Because I know he's had some like interesting like topics over the last couple of months. There, he has a little kind of like, but I do, kind of like fantastic. Avoided the spotlight a little bit there, but I do think he understands how to like portray. I think he really knows how to get. I think he understands how to like portray high-profile figures in our culture quite well.
See how. Yeah, he's able to. Yeah, and so truth be told, I have what's called Masterclass. And so anybody who doesn't have told I have was by them, but I'm just going to
you said you had masterclass.
And so anybody who doesn't know, this is all of the great.
You said you had masterclass.
This is all of the great genres. And Aaron Sorkin is on there talking about all of the great. And when he talks about all these other tremendous genres, and Aaron Sorkin is on there talking about writing. And when he talks about what he was thinking doing tremendous, because and so it's just. What he was thinking doing it's one of my favorite movies. I just one of my favorite movies. But there's something that's interesting. And we haven't touched upon it yet. I thought it was so well. But there's something that's interesting.
Yeah,
and we have nominated for Best Actor. And so, of course, Leo ended up nominated for Best Actor. I think everybody
well deserved, by the way. He's been wanting to get that for quite a while there. I will say this: I am sad Michael Fassbender didn't get that, but at the same time, I mean, Leo has been getting this. I am sad Michael Fassbender and hasn't gotten it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Leo has been getting it. It's not like this, but you are right about that. We're talking about hasn't gotten like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of like him getting it sort of derailed his career. You are right about that. We're talking about the story how like this kind of. Sort of derailed his career a little bit.
He didn't win for that. So all you have to do is take a look at the projects. He didn't win for that. All you have to do is take a look after projects that Steve Jobs took. And it's just after. So he does Steve Jobs in 2000. Steve Jobs. And I'm just going to name you a couple. It's just, okay. So he does Steve Jobs in 2015. Okay, I mean he was Magneto. Okay, fine. You have X-Men Apocalypse. We have Assassin's Creed. He was Magneto. Okay, fine. Terrible.
That was
okay. Jeremy, I have Assassin's Creed that you could have had. But they totally butchered.
That was.
Jeremy, I was about to try and make PG-13 so they could have other people do that. And Ubisoft wanted to try and make a PG-13 so they could have other people do that. Alien Covenant was not a bad movie. Okay. Alien Covenant wasn't a great. I gotta say, Alien Covenant was not a bad movie. Playing both roles. Okay, was unbelievable. It wasn't a
absolutely
great movie. I thought that was playing both roles. He carried that movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
because you knew I thought that was what was going to happen. Totally, he carried that just movie. A prequel because you knew what was going to happen. Movie
Prometheus. I will say this much: I did say Alien Covenant wasn't
movie
the greatest, but I wouldn't call it a bad movie. I will say this much: I did say Alien Covenant wasn't. I mean, it was the greatest, but I wouldn't call it a bad movie either.
No, definitely not a bad. Definitely not a bad. I mean, it was pretty. The Snowman. I think the word we would
that was pretty.
I have Snowman.
That was yeah. I heard it was awful.
I'll be honest with you. I walked out of it.
Yeah, I never. But I heard it was
always
awful.
wanted to give a movie a chance. I always come in. I never. I always wanted to give a movie a chance, and I just. There's only been a couple movies. With Snowman was one of them. Ocean's 8. There's only been a couple. I just couldn't. I couldn't walk out. I walked Ocean's. Ocean's 8 was another one. I just couldn't. I couldn't walk out. I walked out. Finishes. I just couldn't. Dark. I got about 35 minutes in.
Nice.
Finishes. Plays Magneto again. Dark Phoenix. This had a lot of problems.
Yeah, and also I wouldn't put that on like.
This had a
Magneto. Yeah, and also I wouldn't put that on. But also you also got to keep in mind during that time, like that was during the whole Bryan Singer scandal. But also you also got to keep in mind during that time, like everybody hated Bryan Singer like on those X movies. From the first film, like everybody hated him, and like to see like Sam Kilberg, who was from the first film, who was like everybody praised by the cast, to see like Sam Kilberg, who was kind of sucks at that movie, who was like universally praised by the cast and crew during the time.
The point I'm getting at is
that
this.
Movie just kind of crashed.
Usually when you win an Academy Award, the point I'm getting at is this: elevates your career. If he usually when you win an Academy Award, he didn't win the Academy Award. And by the way, it wasn't his fault. Okay, the fact that I think in any other year he would have won. And by the way, it wasn't any other year he wins it hands out. But because he didn't win any other year he would have won. I think his career any other year he won hands out. He tanked. But because the last 7 years of his career, I think his career. Besides doing X-Men, which the last 7 years of his career done with.
Yeah, they're.
I mean, whether it's Apocalypse, whether it's Dark Phoenix, whether it's Days of Future Past,
I mean,
whether it's Apocalypse, we get it. Whether it's Dark Phoenix, Slims over the head. Whether it's Days of Future Past, it's like, okay, we get it. I think you don't have to Slims over the head. Whether because of that loss that night, we get it. His career's never been the same.
That what other projects do you have working on right now?
I mean, so he has currently he has
what other projects do you have
one that he's working on called Killer. So he has currently he has so one that he's working on called The Killer. That's in post production. Okay, and Next Goal Wins. That one is that's in post production.
Film, which by the way,
Next Goal Wins.
Taika Waititi is a bunch of cannibals that I don't want to get into.
Yeah.
Taika Waititi is a bunch of cannibals that I don't want to get into.
Yeah. That's going to be interesting. But I
think Taika Waititi is a great director, but I feel like some of his comments
that's going to be interesting.
I think Taika Waititi is a great director, but I feel like you just want to just take a break from the press, Mr. Waititi. Enjoy your like money from the press. 2 Fuller films, which are both successful. Enjoy your like money from 2 Fuller films, which are both successful.
Kung Fury 2, so we have in post, and The Killer is in post. We have Kung Fury 2, so I mean, in post, the fact that he didn't win that night, then I think Wild Speaking derailed his career. So I mean, whereas you take a look at somebody like Kate Winslet that night, I think because she won an Academy Award before. Whereas you take a look at somebody like Kate Winslet, another notch in her belt, because she won an Academy Award before. Respect that she's nomination after nomination, like a Meryl Streep, and I think nomination after nomination after nomination. This is a phenomenal, and I think I love sitting down and watching this again.
Absolutely, same here.
I don't want to call it perfect. I love sitting down and watching this again.
Absolutely, same here.
I don't want to call it perfect. By the way, all films few movies that would call perfect, but like The Dark Knight. And look, by the way, all film is subjective.
Yeah, absolutely.
But The Dark Knight not absolutely perfect. But this is definitely it's
but the Batman is perfect.
But this is definitely. I mean, that's.
The Batman is perfect.
We'll talk about that. That was an amazing movie. But I mean, that's Rewatch Wednesday episode number 1. That was an amazing movie. This is that's in these the movies we're going to be bringing episode number 1. Speaking of heat, this is we are going to sit down. We're going to be bringing the next episode we do is we are going to sit down. It's going to be the Michael Mann episode we do. As a matter of fact, I just bought Heat 2 the other day. I have the Michael Mann film. As a matter of fact, I just bought Heat 2 the other day. I have to start reading it. Heat is a perfect movie. In my opinion. And the reason I say that is because it has everything. Heat is a perfect movie. It has action, in my opinion. It has drama. The reason I say that is because it has everything. Memorable scenes to it. It has action. It has drama, a little bit of comedy. It has, enough memorable scenes to it, enough that it has chuckle out. A little bit of comedy and not, enough to call it comedy, but enough that you get a chuckle out of that. And I mean, I put it. I mean, the 8 minutes, the top 25 scenes ever put on film. That I mean, is that coffee shop? I put it. Be honest,
totally. I would be glad. I want to do that there. But anyway, I'm so happy to be on this podcast. I hope so. I would be glad. Films that are not just anyway. I'm so happy to be on this podcast. I love that. I love not just
as we wrap up
IP and Cape stuff. I love that.
Do a couple things as we wrap up. One Flashback Fridays. I just wanted to do a couple things. I will get it as we depart here. Number 1, Flashback Friday. I didn't put it up this week. I will get it. We got House of the Dragon coming up on Sunday next week. Kyle and I are going to be sitting down on Monday. We got House of the Dragon coming up on Sunday. Kyle and I are going to be sitting down on Monday. And we got the doing Mondays. 4th episode of House of the Dragon. So that's kind of fun. We've got the first episode. We got the Mondays. Brad are actually we've got the first episode 2006. Sat down with Brad for, and that's probably up there. All about the 2006, and then we have The Departed. We're just the beginning of Rewatch Wednesdays. So this is going to be. I'm going to try and bring the beginning of content as I can. So this is going to be. I'm going to try and bring you as much content as I can. Exactly. Very well put. Very well put.
David. Cinema.
Any final thoughts before we head out?
Not really, man. I think we said it all. I think this movie is fantastic. I think it's probably top 5. Not really, man. I think we said it all. I think this movie is fantastic. I think it's probably. I don't think he's really topped it ever since there. I mean, yesterday was okay, but I feel like this is. I don't think he's really topped it ever since there. I mean, yesterday was okay.
All right,
but
so
I
for
feel
my
like this is
very
probably
special
one of the
guest,
better films.
and I'm David Steele,
I
and
agree.
you have been listening to Rewatch Wednesdays. Very special guest,
And watching Rewatch
and I'm David
Yep.
Steele, and you have been listening to Rewatch Wednesdays, and watching Rewatch Wednesdays.
Yep.